She defined an integrated person so well that I just really, it changed my life. She said an integrated person is someone who owns their gifts and talents without feeling better than, and owns and accepts their weaknesses and their shortcomings without feeling less than.
Welcome back, Envisionaries, to the Dream into Being podcast, where mind science, transformational psychology, and magic all merge into one. If you're ready to dream again and transcend the inertia of what you've known, then I invite you to join me, your host and Envisioneer, Kat Devine, in expanding the boundaries of your own Fantasia by remembering that you are the master you've been waiting for. Welcome back, Envisionaries. Today's episode is actually going to be a little bit unique because this woman is a genius and an expert in the field of connection. And originally, I had invited her on to share her creation experiment journey, her entrepreneurial journey. And in the process of getting to know each other better, it just clicked that I would be missing a huge opportunity for myself to learn and for all of the listeners to understanding in a very grounded and practical way how we can approach our relationships differently. So today is going to be a hybrid of the creation and the connection experiment. So I'm actually really, really looking forward to this so much. And what I do, Merianne, is instead of going through somebody's bio, what I love to do is we rarely get the opportunity to celebrate ourselves. So what I want to give you an opportunity is to have a little mini brag session and tell all of my viewers how amazing you are and all the things you're just so proud of when it comes to your business and what you've accomplished and through the lens of relationships.
Okay. Whoa. I love that you said, what are you really proud of? And I would have to say my stayability. So I was talking to my brother years ago, and he gave me some feedback about how I'm perceived by him and by others. And I had already had an inkling that maybe people were perceiving me this way, but I didn't have a lot of stay power or stickability. I would jump from network marketing business to network marketing business. I always knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur, right? Okay. But I didn't feel comfortable in the creative space. So it was the plug and play business, right? Where I don't have to think, I don't have to create, I don't have to problem solve. I just have to business in the box, follow the formula and collect my checks. And my brother, when he said, like, you start a lot of things, but you don't stick with them. You don't finish things. And that was crushing. And I felt so much shame and embarrassment and humiliation. I was like, this has to end. And I had, at the time that he said that, I had started a program where I was getting certified as a holistic nutritionist. So I had gone to health coaching school, and I liked being a coach. I knew that I was talented in that area. And I had real passion for food and health and wellness, right? So I got into that space, and then I went into the holistic nutrition certification, and it took me, I think, 7 years to complete it, which is not a 7-year program. And once I realized, like, okay, this has got to end, I completed the rest of what I had to do in like 3 months. It was just, yeah, we got to circle back because I have to tell you how I ended up being able to do it, whereas I couldn't before. And the emotion that was blocking me from being able to finish was shame.
Yeah.
Right. I was so ashamed, and I wasn't super passionate about the food and diet and physical health and wellness so much. And so I was like, well, this isn't really where I'm going anyways. Why finish? Well, because you started it. That's why. Yeah. Right. So anyway, I'm really proud that I started going down this road of coaching, whatever iteration it has become, 10 years ago now. So I'm really proud that I've stuck with that. And yes, it has morphed in a few different ways because it's gone from physical wellness to mental and emotional and spiritual awareness. And now we're relational. It's still coaching. as still using my superpower of listening and using my intuition and stepping away, taking my ego and taking my personality away and letting whatever works through me to work through me. And that's when I love what I do. It's so much fun. It's like alchemy, because it's more like I'm a participant. It's not all on me. So that's how I avoid the imposter syndrome.
Right.
I had imposter syndrome like crazy in the beginning. And that doesn't happen anymore because I recognize and acknowledge that it's not just me sitting here in the coach's chair.
Oh my gosh. Okay. First of all, I just got full body chills because 1,000%, I could not agree with you more. And in fact, I've only ever heard one other person say this, and he's a super famous coach. And it changed my life to understand what you just said, because you're right. Our ego will want to take over and perform and show up a certain way. And he said essentially the same thing you did is our only job. Two things is to listen to the person in front of us and the higher guidance that's coming through, and to be a clear channel
for it. Yeah.
So
yeah. And when I'm letting my ego guide, I suck as a coach. It's not good.
Probably because we have too many biases, right? Yeah.
And I'm too much in my head. And that I have a coach myself, thank goodness. And she has really taught me how to be that clean and clear channel, to get out of my own mind and really be in the mind of the person that is in front of me.
Do you have any extra tips? Like, this sounds like you've really dove deep into this topic. I haven't. I'm very surface level. I practice it, but I've never really sat down and thought about how could I teach this to somebody else.
Oh, well, I recommend signing up for my coach. She's great. Okay. But we can always know when we feel a shift in energy in our body. We always know if we've jumped into our mind and our judgments and our insecurities when, well, first of all, they've said a sentence or so and we're like, oh crap, what did they just say? I wasn't present. I wasn't here for that. And in order for me to coach really well, I have to be here for all of it, for every single word, for every single hesitation, for every single breath. I have to be on, which, having sinus problems lately and making inflammation in my brain actually does hinder my ability to do that. And so that's a whole other story of me figuring out what's going on energetically with my sinuses, but I'm finally think I have a leg up on it. But yeah, just being able to be very clear-headed in my own mind. And here's what's so fun: when you're getting out of the way, right? And you're being clear-headed and you notice any energetic shifts in your body that signal you to, oh, I let something that they said hop me out of their head and into mine and made it about me and made it about my insecurity. Oh no, am I doing this wrong? Or did I making it about me? And it's never about me. And you can know when that's happened because you feel an energetic drop in your body.
Okay.
Right. And so just being aware of that and then bringing just a tiny it doesn't take a lot of time in the conversation, but just bringing your attention to that energetic shift, being aware of it and just shift right out of it. It's just a signal like, oh, and it has to be forgiven or you can't shift out of it.
Interesting. So it sounds like shame is like a common denominator for a lot of what we're going to get into today. Yeah. So thank goodness, because it is a topic that has been swept under the rug, I think, until more recently, more of us.
Thank you, Brene Brown.
Right? I know. I mean, one thing that's really fascinating to me is I get to participate in so many different types of communities. And what I found across the board is that there is a common denominator of shame and guilt, and that many of us are unconsciously programmed to focus on our weaknesses and our faults and really attach to them. Mm-hmm. I thought, wow, what if that one shift was eliminated and we instead celebrated ourselves? Like, it was so great for me to see you so willing to jump right into the brag session, because that's not the case for everybody. It's not comfortable for everybody. I
was listening to a podcast years ago, Dr. Finlayson Fife. I don't know if you've heard her podcast. She does a relational intimacy type of podcast. And she defined an integrated person so well that I just really, it changed my life. She said an integrated person is someone who owns their gifts and talents without feeling better than, and owns and accepts their weaknesses and their shortcomings without feeling less than.
Perfect.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the ultimate experience. And yeah, I really do want to come back to this, but you also said something that I think I don't want to miss the opportunity on, because when it comes to the creation experiment, AKA being an entrepreneur, this was a huge lesson for me too. It's interesting. I wonder if many of us that were meant to help assist others with these things, we just had to go through the mud and we had to experience what it was like to not be able to manifest and to not be able to stick and connect and commit. And so I want to come back to what was that shift for you, because I had a super similar experience of receiving that feedback and being like, oh, okay, well, now what? Now what do I do? And so for me, it was finding a way to commit where I was accountable to somebody else. And then that changed my life and literally took me to places I didn't think I was capable of. So there's something so magic about
accountability is magical.
And then the commitment piece itself. You know, I've heard this saying that the universe will construct other universes around committed energy.
Oh man, I've never heard it said that way, but that's so true.
And it stuck with me. And I think about that often. And I was actually just filming some TikToks about this the other day. And I know it's not a popular topic. I don't think most people want to hear it. You know,
accountability is the least popular topic right now.
It's so important because it's the initiation, it's the gateway to manifesting all of our dreams. So I want to give you the floor on sharing what your transformation was, because this is really so important.
Yeah, the accountability piece was so lacking for me. I could never be committed and consistent in showing up for my business. I was always making excuses. And the shift for me came along the same time that my own relationship with my husband was really shifting. We were coming back from betrayal trauma and taking it one day at a time, trying to figure out, are we still in this or not? And really stepping into a whole new understanding of what love really is and what it is not. Caused me to really figure out what is self-love and what is it not. And when most, self-love is this big buzzword now in the self-help, and nobody's talking about that there's two selves.
Oh, okay. Let's talk about that.
There's the egoic self, the personality that you've constructed with your thoughts. And there's the eternal self that changes no matter what happens to you, no matter what you think, no matter what you do. It is changeless. It is always the same. And that's the self that needs to be loved.
Interesting. Okay. I've heard it, well, similar, but I've also heard that there is an aspect of learning how to love the imperfect ego as well.
Right. And that's the integrating. It's not identifying with the ego. It's not fighting the ego, because whatever you fight persists, right, and gets magnified. It's like, okay, ego, you're along for the ride, but you're in the back seat.
Okay.
Right. So thank you so much for trying to protect me from something you think is a threat. Thank you. But I've got this. Somebody else is in the driver's seat now, which is, in my experience, true transformation cannot happen permanently unless someone acknowledges as a higher power, something greater than themselves, because the ego makes a mess of everything. If we're relying on just our ego and we're just identifying with me being a personality with a name and a body and all those things, it's just a mess. It never works.
Well, and what's really hilarious, this is my take on it. I heard this definition of enlightenment a few years ago that really changed the game for me, because I had this misconception that enlightenment was, like unicorns and rainbows and butterflies and everything.
Oh no,
everything's wonderful. And I think a lot of people have that for some reason. And I heard this definition that basically said an enlightened person is somebody who is willing to experience absolutely anything. And it just really changed my life, because I think I let go of a ton of resistance to what is. And then it clicked for me that, oh, we're supposed to be a mess. Like meaning our human character, that we had, people believe in this or not, that we select our plot points before we come into this
I
life.
believe that. Yep.
It kind of makes sense. And that we also select the possible transformations in the journey, and that it was supposed to be messy, and that it's okay, and that it's okay to love that.
Yes.
So that's brought so much healing to me. But I would love to go back maybe to when you were about 5 years old. I think there's something really magical that if we will witness ourselves at that age, there's a lot of clues for us. That seems to be the magical time where we are so in our purpose. Like we're very clear as far as what we're playing, how we're playing, what are we pretending, what are we visioning for our future. And I found a lot of clues for myself of what I was doing at that time that has completely guided me to where I'm at now. So I'm curious if there was any clues for you at that age. And it could have even been the clue of, I've learned that having the ability to read people is actually a trauma response.
Yes.
Right. And that
I love that you know that, because a lot of people are like, I'm an empath, I was born this way. No, you weren't. You were traumatized that way.
So if you don't mind talking a little bit, whatever your comfort level is, but I think it's such an important thing to recognize, going back to the attachments of identity, that we can get attached to, like you said, being a disempowered empath and kind of getting stuck there. But for me, it was incredibly healing to find out, oh no, this was just a response to a situation that was not great. However, I was able to pull out phenomenal abilities as a result that are serving my life today. So it was just a great perceptual shift. But anything you're comfortable sharing.
Well, it's interesting because, people who have had difficult childhoods, you'll find don't have a lot of memories of their childhood. That's very, very common. Yeah. But I didn't have an awful childhood, but the memories are scattered. And of course, because of negativity bias, what I remember in that age is negative or seemingly negative. So I sucked my finger as a soothing tool, I think until I was probably 6 or 7. I don't remember when it was that I decided I was done with it, but I do remember that my father was adamant that I stop. And that he was always on me if he caught me doing it. So I do very clearly remember sucking my finger and watching TV. And I was half paying attention to the TV. And the other part of my attention was paying attention to the sound of his office chair creaking, indicating that he was going to get up and enter the room. So I would take and that walking on eggshells type of anxiety was an imprint at that age. Right. And I clearly remember it. So yeah, there's that.
Which probably gives you some layer of superpower when you're interacting with people. Like you were saying, I don't know if this was before we started recording or not, but to not even miss the breath or to miss an expression. It's almost like you can tell everything that's going on if you're really observing and really paying attention.
Yeah. Like, for example, the client that I was just with, he's got a lot of uncertainty about his relationship, and he can feel it really acutely in his stomach. And he's trying to solve the feeling with thinking. Obviously that doesn't work. And so I just, during the session, I said, okay, we're going to take all of your attention and be with the feeling in your stomach. Just be with it. Okay. So I'm watching it. This is why it's so important for me to coach face to face, because I'm watching. Right. And he's with it, but then his eyes start moving. And I go, you're thinking again. You're thinking again. Get out of your thoughts, bring it back to the feeling in your stomach. And a couple of times his brain was trying to take him, and I could see his eye movement, right? And then I was able to see the moment when he actually did drop into the feeling, and his eyes stopped and they kind of looked down, and he was breathing really rhythmically. And that's when I realized he's finally with the feeling. And then I said, how does it feel now? And he said, relax. And I said, now what's happening in your mind? He said, oh, it's clear. And I'm like, well, okay, now you actually can problem solve, because when your nervous system is triggered and you have shame or regret or whatever it is, okay, your brain's always tracking your nervous system.
Right.
And so your brain can only offer you thoughts that are a vibrational match to what's going on in your nervous system.
Of course.
Just like what Einstein said, he's famous for saying you can't solve a problem with the thinking that caused it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And when you're still in the result of the thought, which is the emotion, you can't solve it. So we got to the other end of the emotion. His mind was clear. And I said, now what? And he goes, I know exactly what to do. I'm like, okay, good.
It's so brilliant that that's how you operate, because I think, believe it or not, I think all of us in general, I've heard a statistic that 95% of the population is in sympathetic dominant fight or flight 95% of the day, and that we're never really communicating with each other because we simply don't have access to the frontal lobe, the creative mind, which is where the solutions are. So that's something that I practice in my own work as well, is how do we, and I'm curious what your process is, but mine is acknowledging what is there, validating what is there, letting, the guard drop.
Yes. And taking down the defensive.
Yep. Yeah. And it is amazing to witness. It's like the lights are coming on, right? When they make room for that. And I love this topic so much because it makes you wonder what kind of society we would have if we were all emotionally intelligent.
Oh, yeah.
To that degree. I mean, otherwise it feels like we're all in reactive states. And until we move out of the competitive mind and into the creative, oh gosh, we're going to have a really hard time solving any real major problems on the world stage.
Well, it's funny, you in this conversation, you kind of asked those broad questions a couple of times. What would life look like without shame as this common thread that we're all trying to buffer against? And what would life look like if, we were all emotionally intelligent? And the first time you asked it, my brain, or whatever you want to call it, something offered me the movie, The Invention of Lying.
I've never heard of it. Okay, I'm going to put
The Invention of Lying. And it is quite the experience to watch it, because it is so bold-faced, telling the truth all the time without any emotional buffering, because there's no emotions involved. And so it's hilarious because he says things, and it's been over 10 years since I've seen it, so I'm not going to be able to quote it accurately, but he would say things like, well, you look really ugly today. just what's on his mind, and like people aren't really ruffled by it. They're like, oh, I do.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Yeah.
Essentially they're just highlighting, projecting our thoughts out into reality without the emotional reactions.
Yeah. Without hiding. What would life be like if we weren't all hiding from the truth?
Yes.
The truth about ourselves, the truth about everybody else. What if we weren't hiding?
Yes.
It's pretty cool. It's hilarious.
Okay, I'm gonna have to watch this one. Yeah, and I think about those kinds of things mainly because this journey is not super easy. The spiritual awakening path, and not just that, but stepping into the space of service, which we're going to talk about with the creation experiment. I often come back to what is the bigger purpose of all of this? Like, where is this all going? What is the why behind it? So I do toggle back and forth between this high dimensional perspective, but I also really appreciate practicality and groundedness, because unless we're here in our body on the planet, we don't have that much agency. And I think that's where many of us can get stuck, of really trying to project into higher consciousness, but really not knowing what to do with it once we've got it.
Right. Because this journey is a paradoxical one. Because it's both and. It's the higher thinking and the being grounded in our humanness. It's our divinity and our humanity at the same time. Right. And they seem contradictory, but so what? They are what they are. And I have found that to be true when you're bumping up against a greater spiritual truth, you will always find paradox.
Yes, I agree.
So, and just to, I think, circle back with the, overcoming the shame of not ever finishing anything, because I had to every single day forgive myself for it. I had to forgive the past, and I had to forgive all those choices and the reason I did it, and feel the shame. And then I could be free to make a totally different choice once I dove into the shame and forgave it.
Okay. I'm super curious about the topic of forgiveness because it has been kind of a wild card for me. I know that's my work in this life, big time.
It's everybody.
Okay, good. To be honest, I've never heard a definition exactly of what is it and how do you do it. So I'm curious what your definition is of it and what does it look like if you're guiding somebody else to make that choice?
Yeah. So here's what's so interesting, and here's another paradox. Forgiveness isn't really something that we do. Mm-hmm. Forgiveness is something that happens as a result of becoming whole. The result of us seeing ourselves as untarnished by whatever seemed to offend us, but by whatever seemed, remember that's a key word, seemed to have hurt us. Because the truth is, our real reality is that we're spirit, right? That we're eternal and we're invulnerable to hurt. Nothing can hurt us. Mm-hmm. So if we perceive ourselves as hurt, we're in wrong thinking, which is going to trigger a lot of people. Right? We've misthought, we've misperceived if we think we're hurt. And so if we can do the work to see ourselves as whole and not taken from, not in any state of lack or lesser than as a result of anything that has happened to us, then we're whole again. And it's like the hurt never happened.
So this is fascinating. How does somebody, especially when you're working with them, it's obvious to you that it's a distortion, mm-hmm. right, of their perception. How do you guide somebody through recognizing that and first allowing it to be there, forgiving it, and transcending it?
So first we have to find out how it happened, right? So I take them through a process that's kind of like cognitive behavioral therapy that's breaking down what is the perception that caused the feeling, that caused the behavior, that caused the result. And connecting those dots that this result happened because you thought this, mm-hmm. right? And a lot of times it does take really focused inquiry to figure out exactly what the perception is, because many of us don't think in words and sentences, right? We think in pictures or ideas or whatever. And so just even articulating what the thought was is really hard. Mm-hmm. But here's the thing about misperceptions. They can't be healed. They can't be taken from us until we shed light on them, right? We can't offer something up to God to heal for us until we know what we're surrendering, right? Mm-hmm. Because then it's against our will, right?
Interesting. Oh, I've never thought of it that way, but you're right.
And our misperceptions have to be corrected one thought at a time, one perception at a time. This is classic Course in Miracles, by the way, if you've ever studied Course in Miracles. And so that's why we do it one thought at a time, one circumstance at a time. But what's so fun is that once you do the work of one circumstance that was upsetting to you, changing the thinking of that one bleeds into other congruent type of circumstances. So I take them through like, okay, this is the perception. This is how you interpreted what was going on that caused this result. And then they realize that. And then it's the accountability piece, right? Taking ownership that this clearly created the result. It's my responsibility. And then before we can find another perception, before we can correct the perception, we have to forgive the fact that we chose that perception, that we practiced our brain's most repeated and rehearsed program. And we took brain's bait is the way I say it, right? We took the bait.
Yeah.
We have to forgive ourselves for doing that.
Yeah.
We were pointed forward instead of backwards, right? And once we, and again, the forgiveness thing, it isn't something that we do. It's coming from a place of understanding. I understand why I did that. I understand that I was in fear. I understand that I was trying to protect myself. Mm-hmm. And I forgive myself for wanting to protect myself because that's the part of me that loves me.
Right. So do you study like internal family systems and mm-hmm. parts work? Okay. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious. So at least when I'm working with myself or other people, and I am working with a distortion and bringing some balance to it, I find that I will animate it even more going through the process as it's coming up for review, and I can start making much more conscious decisions. Is that something that you find occurs, or do you notice that people are able to address it in that session and just let it go?
Can you further describe to me what you mean by you animate it even more?
Yeah, okay. Great example would be something super small, like let's say that I'm struggling with being impatient in my life, and I consciously choose to let that attachment to that identity go. And then what I would notice is multiple opportunities in life. So it's not like the patience arrives. I would manifest many opportunities to choose it, and then have that conscious choice.
Okay. Yes. Yes.
Presented. So is that
so you unconsciously manifest more and more situations in which you are presented with the opportunity to choose patience or impatience,
or whatever it is that I'm working.
Whatever it is you're working on. Yeah. Yeah. I've heard that that process been described as chemicalization. Yeah. So it's the universe saying, "Are you sure?
Oh,
prove it."
Is the free will piece on steroids, I bet. Yeah. So then with your approach, is that something that you're finding, I guess, dissolves the distortions immediately, and people really are able to let go? It
depends on the person. That letting go of the impatience, first of all, is the diving into why use that coping mechanism? What is it trying to serve? Right. And forgiving that part. Like, what are you buffering against? What are you afraid of? And the impatience is always a tool, just as your example, right? It's always a tool to try to protect us from something. So whatever the thing that you're trying to protect yourself from with the impatience, if you just run into that thing, then the impatience doesn't have to come up to try to protect you because you're not afraid of it anymore.
I gotcha. Okay. So then out of curiosity, going back to the shame, what do you think the higher wisdom that shame has to offer us as a coping mechanism? Like, what is that?
Such a good question. That's such a good question. Well, I've heard it described as there's two different ways of interacting with shame. There's shame internalized, and then there's just shame situationally. So shame can be actually really, practical or utilitarian, useful, right?
Yeah.
Shame can be useful if we're applying it to the situation and how we chose to show up in that situation, given the thought process we were choosing to co-sign on. But if the shame is internalized, we make it as something like, I am always bad. This is who I am. This is who I'm always going to be. I'm never going to be good enough. I've always not been good enough. Then it's not useful. Right? Okay. Shame and guilt is really close to shame, right? They can be used to signal us, to let us know it's like a divergence. Who do I want to be? This is who I was in this situation. This is who I chose to be. And who could I choose to be in the future? And guilt and shame is a signpost to go, let's make it different. Here's an opportunity to make a different decision. If we didn't have the emotion, we couldn't know that we had a choice to do different.
Right. Okay. So it sounds like the difference between the healthy experience is that it's just an experience and somebody would recognize that, versus it's an identity.
Right. And this goes, Marty Seligman, he's the father of positive psychology movement. Okay. He wrote the book Learned Optimism, and they did a really extensive study of people who are optimists and people who are pessimists. And they found, and I don't remember what they are, so I'm not going to be able to educate you fully, but they did find the divergence in thinking is universal versus, what was the word? Opposite of universal, right? If something bad has happened or I did something bad or whatever, the pessimist personalizes it and universalizes it, makes it an always the case type of decision instead of this happened this one time. Right. I can't remember. There's like four 4 different things that they were able to identify in the thinking of optimist versus pessimist. But what I found super interesting about that book is there's a lot of pitfalls of optimism too that we have to be careful of.
Like
not being grounded in reality, telling ourselves stories to make ourselves feel better because we don't want to feel bad.
Right.
Right. Optimists do live longer than pessimists, but you better have a pessimist as your CFO or you're in trouble.
That is so awesome. And it's hilarious as I started off as a pessimist and did a lot of brain retraining to now I probably am. Interesting that you brought that up. I probably am a little bit too on that hopeful or optimistic side. And I think that, I would benefit a lot from having people like that, keeping things grounded.
Right. And that's my goal with clients, right? So the definition of insanity, we all know it. But for me, the definition of sanity is just as useful. Oh. And that is being grounded, interacting with reality on reality's terms.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So, when we're trying to figure out how did you create this result and we're trying to do accountability, I don't let my clients get away with telling a story that we don't have enough information to make that for sure we know that that's what happened. Either way, I don't let them get away with telling themselves a story to make them feel better. And I don't let them get away with telling themselves a story to make them feel worse if we lack an adequate information and evidence to make that actually the case.
That is fantastic. Oh my gosh. Remind me, do you have your own podcast?
I do. I don't do it a lot. And I've just recently started inviting people again. Okay. But it's called the My Story podcast. And it's just, I have found that the most transformation that has ever happened for anyone is in story, which is why Jesus told us story. Yes, it's always story. And so it's just an opportunity to invite people to come tell their story. And the framework is, what are the 5 most influential events that have shaped your story or your life path?
Amazing. Well, I'm just sitting here listening to you going, oh my gosh, you are such a wealth of knowledge. And I can see very clearly that you understand what you're saying. They're not just words. And the first thing I was thinking is like, where can I get more of this? Like, this is really fantastic. So I do want to shift gears to talking a little bit more about you and your life, because first of all, I know that you and I have shared with each other really openly and vulnerably about the realities of being an entrepreneur. There's part of what this show is about is being vulnerable and transparent, pulling that curtain back and being like, you guys, this is what it is. The glamour and all of that is a sales tactic. It just is. But you've been living this life for 10 years. And I would love whatever you feel comfortable sharing. Like you just said, that we have the most healing and transformation and story. If you guys don't take anything else from this podcast, know that that is true, and to commit yourself to receiving the stories of others and being in community. That will change you more than you can imagine. We're just creatures of, the mirror neurons, and we model other people. That's the fastest way to transformation.
That's the fastest way to inspiration.
Of course. Right. So whatever you feel comfortable sharing of what has the last 10 years looked like, and the successes, but even the failures, and making all of that okay.
Okay. Well, for the first half of my career, I didn't believe that I was good enough. I didn't believe that I was a coach. I felt like an imposter every time I said, I'm a coach. And I was waiting for other people to believe in me first, especially my husband. I was making it his job to be my cheerleader and believe in me. And the more he didn't, the more I resented him for not showing up in a way I should have been showing up for myself. Anyone familiar?
Right. All of us.
And then in 2019, I met someone who was doing everything that I wanted to do. She was coaching, and she was, people were paying her, and she was getting clients, and she was not even giving a crap about it as much as I cared about it. It was just a fun little hobby she didn't care about, but take it or leave it. I'll do it if I want to do it. If, and I was making it my identity, and I was making it my rite of passage, that if I can make it as this awesome, like in-demand coach, then I'm good enough. Then I'm a grown-up. Then I can take myself seriously. Then other people will take myself seriously. And of course, entrepreneurs, we know that none of that will ever happen until we do it first. Mm-hmm. And so that was a real shift for me to meet this woman and go, wait a second, she doesn't have any of the knowledge and the training that I have, and she is doing everything I want to do.
Wow.
And I was like, okay, that's it. I have to actually just take myself seriously and stop waiting for my husband to do it. And I have to do things that are hard and scary. Yeah. Like go into debt to pay a marketing team to do all that work that I could do on my own that would take me forever and a long learning curve and keep me from doing what I want to do, which is coaching. So I did that. I went into debt and I purchased a marketing team to do all my branding, my everything, put up my website and everything. And that was such a good investment. Oh my gosh. And then around the same time, I found my coach, and she's amazing. And I went into debt to hire her too. And her program changed everything. Wow. Really changed everything, and really allowed me to step into my identity as a coach, and gave me the roadmap to do it. And that's when everything shifted. Everything changed. That was me rebranding from health coach to life coach. Okay. And that was also the same time that one of the rockiest times in our marriage. So my husband, he was having a bit of an identity shift because he was always full-time military, and his contract was up, and he was being faced with the decision to go civilian or stay military. And he didn't like being in the military, but it's a nice, safe place to be, right? He had a lag time of when his contract was up and when he was starting his new job. So he did find a new job. It took him some time, and I freaked out, by the way. That's a whole other story. And during that time, when the lag time, he wasn't occupied in doing something productive, which is really mentally healthy for men, especially. So he decided to go about the business of working on all the deferred maintenance that he'd been putting off around the house and fixing all the things that needed to be done. When he was doing that, though, he kept on uncovering more things that and roadblocks, and it wasn't working the way he thought it should go, right? And it was harder and more expensive and more time consuming, right? So he's feeling really discouraged. He's also not working, so he's not feeling like he's productive. And here I am going for broke with my business, and it's working, and I'm signing clients, and I'm making money, and I'm finally feeling like I always wanted to feel in my business. And that contrast was really stretching or tension building, right? And he got really resentful and contemptuous and bitter and throwing shade my way. And I was like, oh no. And that was that chemicalization. That was the universe going, are you sure? Yeah. Are you sure? Because if I was going to do this for myself and step into this identity, I had to accept the possibility that it would mean the end of my safe haven, which was my relationship. Mm-hmm. And I had to be willing to go for it, even if that were to be the result. And that was so hard. Yeah. And that's what I find in my relationship coaching is people want to step into this new identity, but they see it as a threat to the existing relationship. Even if the existing relationship sucks, it's still the safe haven, what we all know. And so they'll hold themselves back, which is what I was doing. They'll hold themselves back, waiting for the other person to like, come on, grow with me. Please come with me, because I'm going to become a different person. And if you don't become a different person with me, this isn't going to work. Right. And I had to just go for broke and be like, if this results in he can't be with me anymore, fine. Mm-hmm. And that's when everything changed. Wow. And he actually went from saying things like, who the hell would pay for life coaching, to handing out my business cards. Wow. Because I believed it first. not him.
Exactly. Oh,
Yeah.
that's so profound. And thank you for sharing that, because it's a very practical and real thing that happens, whether we're pursuing a business or just awakening and becoming a new version of ourselves. There was a quote, I forget who said it. I think it was Kyle Cease. He said that we're more afraid of losing the things that we can see we're going to lose than to gain what's on the other side of that. And that's kind of just the roadblock for the average person. So the fact that you, knowing what you were choosing, completely changed your identity, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
And then sounds like reflected in your husband's, perception of you completely.
Yeah. And he has retired from the military, and there's no more of this story in the background, like, oh, maybe we can go back. Maybe we can go back to that nice comfy paycheck.
Yeah.
And it's gone. And his identity is no longer, he's like done. He's done with the military. And I'm done with it too. But yeah, I mean, that was the whole beginning too that was when I drew the line. Mm-hmm. And actually that's quite a story. I packed my bags and left to go to a girlfriend's house. And I said, I'm not coming back until you figure out your mental health, because I was taking too much responsibility for his mental health. And I was being his therapist, which a lot of wives will do. Don't do that. And I said, this is way too much emotional heavy lifting for me. This is not my job to keep you mentally healthy. It's yours.
Good.
And so he did. He took total responsibility for his mental health. He knew I was serious because I put action behind it. People don't believe our words. They believe our actions. I packed a bag and I left. Mm-hmm. And I told him, you better figure out what to do with the kids. and yes, was the reaction, the immediate reaction, really ugly? Yes. Right. But I was willing to withstand that because everything I wanted was on the other side of something really uncomfortable and ugly. Mm-hmm. But he did take full responsibility, and he has suffered from depression and anxiety our whole marriage. And since that drawing of the line, he hasn't had episodes like he used to have. Like he takes care of his mental health, and he believes in God now, which that was never the case. He never believed in God. He was always reluctant to believe that there was something big, like I talked about earlier, the higher power. He was always reluctant to, just acknowledge that. Mm-hmm. And now we pray every night as a family. Like what? What?
Man,
and I didn't demand that. Right. I didn't demand that. All I did was, I'm going to take care of me. I'm going to do what's best for me. I'm going to go to church. I'm going to take the kids to church. You're welcome to come. I don't demand that you come. Right. It was all an invitation, never a demanding, and love never demands.
Right. And I love how in your intro that you were super celebrating your ability to stick. And it sounds like it was across the board.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, this new personality came online that knew what she wanted, and she was willing to go all in. And yeah, there's that commitment energy that changes the game. So I want to take a little bit of a peek behind the curtain with your actual business. I know that you went from health and wellness to then, I'm guessing at that point you went into life coaching. But then now I'm so fascinated and actually so grateful for the work that you do. I think it is so incredibly necessary and so important. And thank goodness for people like you that are doing that work. So if you can share with the audience kind of what that transition was and what you've landed on now.
Well, the relationship coaching became kind of a no-brainer for me because it has been the source of my greatest pain. And right, our superpowers grow from our greatest pain. And I always knew that I wanted to have a relationship that had longevity, for that continuity of narrative for my children. I didn't want them to have, clearly I don't have full control over that, but I do. There's the paradox, right? I am 100% responsible for my relationship, but there's also another person who's responsible. So there was that commitment, but I've been studying health and wellness, nutrition science. Like, I'm the geeky one about that. Like, if somebody in a networking meeting comes to me with a product that has a claim, I'm like, show me the science. I want to see it. So I've been studying that for a long time, and there's a lot of contradictory information. And it's all seems, when you dive into it, it seems very legit. So for example, there's one line of belief in nutrition that meat is the way to go and stay away from plants. Most of the plants on this planet are trying to kill us. They're toxic, right? Most of them are too poisonous to eat, right? They've developed that as a defense for becoming overeaten. Animals can move to defend themselves. So let's eat them. And, their livers have already processed out all the toxicity from the plant. So we just get the pure nutrients without the toxicity, right? There's that line of thought. But then you've got all the evidence for plants are medicine and all the essential oils and botanicals and stuff that actually do create shifts and remove blockages for people's bodies to work more efficiently, right? So there's so much contradictory information. It's probably a both and, right? Paradox. But what I have found to be, and I always want to speak with authority, right? And I want to be going the right way. And so what I have found to be the case along all the different theories of diet and wellness is that relationships are the number one thing that impact our health and wellness the most. And if you look at the blue zone stuff, the blue zone studies, right? They all have varied diets and varied lifestyles, but the one thing that it seems to be the case is they live in tight-knit, supportive, intimate communities, right? And you have so many, not outliers or the anecdotal. It's not anecdotal. It's not the exception that proves the rule, because there's lots of them that show that you can have a Dr. Pepper every morning and a cigar every night and live till you're 105 if you live in a supportive, intimate community.
Wow.
And that's where all the diet theory just gets thrown right out the window.
Mm-hmm. That's fascinating. And I've come to that same exact conclusion because, like you said, once you're in a point of focus, the average person will keep looking for information to support whatever it is that they believe. But a truth seeker will research all of it and look for
be comfortable being on the fence.
Yeah, right.
Right. Like, I'm not willing to make a decision one way or the other about gluten.
Okay.
So I'm just going to stay on the fence.
Yeah.
It works for some people. It doesn't work for others. Right. Do an experiment on your own body. Figure it out.
Exactly. But I love this idea. And I think you are hitting the nail on the head that we are designed to be in community. Yep. That was just the original design. And I think there were some statistics that this by far is the highest rate of mental illness
ever
and poverty in the US. And that it's all coming back to like fragmentation and disconnection.
Mm-hmm. Yep. We're hardwired for connection. It's our number one most important need. Yeah. More than food and water and shelter. We need connection. And here's the paradox. We need each other, but we don't need each other. Because we're never really separate from each other. We're never really separate from God. So a person can become enlightened meditating alone under a tree. Right. But we also need each other.
Yeah. So, right. So let's move into what kind of work that you're doing now. I really find it fascinating that you are mostly coaching men. Like you said, it was very organic of an occurrence to happen. But what I love about that is it makes so much sense. I know there's a lot of women coaching women, men coaching men, and there's so much power in that. But when it comes to relationship dynamics, there's a significant benefit to learning from the opposite sex what you want to know about the opposite sex and how to relate. So I'm really fascinated by the work that you do and curious, whatever you feel comfortable sharing with the audience.
Well, a few years ago, I was blessed to come in just seemingly random, but not random, contact with a relationship coach too. We met at a Walmart.
Wow.
And he was very well studied in areas that I hadn't dove into quite yet, like marriage and family relations or systems, right? And he was an educator in that field. And we invited him to a meetup group that we were doing. This is the craziest thing. So I'm a relationship coach now, but at the time, this couple came to our church and they were really struggling with their relationship. And she asked me, is there any kind of group therapy or counseling or anything around here we're really struggling. We can't afford therapy. And I was like, well, I don't think so. I'll check though. So I looked around, there's nothing.
Okay.
And I was like, well, why don't we just create something? And my husband and I were like, yeah, let's do it. So we created a meetup called Creating Harmonious Relationships. And it was for us too, because we were still building back, or not building back, but coming out of the ashes, if you will. And then that couple didn't even show up for a couple of years. But we met all kinds of different people in different relationship configurations, gay, straight, poly, monogamous, you name it. And in a relatively small town, which was really interesting. And this relationship coach, upon my invitation, would come. And I was so glad, because he was able to call me on the carpet about some of my cognitive distortions and the way I was emasculating my husband and the way I was taking too much of a masculine energy in the relationship and filling that masculine role so that he couldn't. Mm-hmm. And the way I was undermining my own happiness in my own marriage. And it was not easy. Woo! It was scathing. But, I want truth. I want to be in alignment with truth and wisdom. And so once I was able to just face that, my mind had been poisoned by a lot of very in vogue ideas, and just forgive it and release it, I was able to get grounded more in reality about the polarity of feminine and masculine energy, and be able to create it more in my relationship. And it has made all the difference in my relationship. And then, of course, moving into my role now as a relationship coach. Yeah, it's really funny how that happened.
I know. It was almost like that original couple was the right people to get you to just do this thing, whether they were part of it or not. And I think that is how life works. I mean, when you're on your path, you're just connected with the right people at the right time. And I'm curious what some of those things were, because I imagine there's a lot of women, myself included, that, and I've heard so many different theories on this, but that if we as women don't feel like we're being protected, that we will shift into our
masculine energy.
Yes.
And it's survival mode. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But then once we're in it, it's hard to get out of it, because it has served us for so long and protected us for so long that we don't allow a man who even wants to be in the masculine role to do it. We can't let go of that control. And take a bunch of small risks to let him do that and show us that he can be dependable, that he can be relied upon. He can't show us if we don't give him an opportunity.
So that was my question to you, was what did that look like in a practical way? So you said little micro opportunities. Okay.
Yep. Feeling the fear and doing it anyway, right? Feeling the fear that he might let you down, feeling the fear that he might not follow through, and deciding ahead of time what you want to think if that happens and how you'll handle it if it does happen.
Okay.
We buffer because of the unknown of like, I don't know what I will do if that happens. Right. If we decide ahead of time, this is how I want to think about it. If that happens, this is how I want to respond. Then it's not so scary. Then we can take those little risks, and they're manageable risks. They're calculated risks.
Okay. And then eventually it was a complete shift in energetics to where you guys don't even think about it anymore. It just...
Well, I mean, we're still in the process, there's still some areas where I could shift out of masculine energy and he can shift out of feminine energy. We don't always have that polarity, but just being aware now of how that dynamic works is everything.
Hey, so this is another one of those universal questions for you. Is recently I've seen a little bit of a movement from women, and it's called, I think, decentering men, where there's like a big shift in consciousness around, I guess, the programming. A lot of programming, you look at all the Disney movies and there's a very clear message of what the little girl to woman's role is, the life path. And so there's a big shift in it. And there's aspects to it that I find interesting. However, I was witnessing this going, I don't think this is the answer. I see what they're doing and I see that they're trying to take their power back. And I know that this is just a symptom of hurt and disappointment and not knowing what to do.
Right. Whenever we're acting out of hurt and disappointment, what we create will not work.
Of course. And so what do you see as the solution from the perspective that you have living the experience yourself? And now
I think it starts with telling the truth.
Okay.
We're telling a lot of lies. Some of it is true. Like a lot of bad men did abuse their power and their positions of authority and leadership as the leader of the family unit, right? Men did abuse that. But was that the norm? No. Women have wanted to be married. For hundreds of years, Jane Eyre wrote about falling in love and getting married, or not Jane Eyre, what's her name? Emily Bronte. And, all these female writers of that era, when they didn't have voting rights and they couldn't own property and all that stuff, what were they writing about? Falling in love, getting married. If it didn't serve women, why would they write about that? If marriage wasn't a good thing for women and for men, why would they write about that?
That's a good question. And that's what I'm looking at, because I see that we all have the desire. And maybe not necessarily for the institution of marriage, but we all have a desire for partnership.
For partnership and coupledom. Yeah. That polarity, because we can feel in our feminine energy that there's a aspect that could bring us more into harmony with life itself. Oh. And that's the masculine energy. Right. And, for people have been shacking up and getting married and partnering for hundreds and hundreds of years because it's worked. Why would people keep doing it if it didn't work? And this lies that our culture is telling us, that marriage has not been a good thing for women. It's shackled women. It's disempowered women. That is not true. And if you really look at the history, during the suffrage movement of the early 20th century, most women didn't want the right to vote.
Interesting.
They didn't want it because they saw that any right comes along with a responsibility. And the responsibility to vote was to be conscripted into military service. And who wants to get shot?
Oh, I didn't
know.
No
woman wanted to go off to war and get shot. So they were like, no, don't give it to me. Because they knew they had the influence in their homes to talk with their husband about the issues politically. And the vote was a vote for the home, not for him. Wow. It was a vote for the partnership. This is what we're voting on. This is what we have come through negotiation and conversation, how we think that the country should go. It's totally discounting the power that women did have within their own homes.
Okay.
We're telling a lot of lies.
It's very obvious to me that it's coming from a place of hurt. And confusion and like a desire to find some level of control. And it was just like playing this out, going, okay, let's just say somebody goes all in, they choose that lifestyle. Then what? Like what changes for them or society? And my instinct is that there's a lot of rebalancing, that there's a lot of opportunity for that. So I'm curious you're up close and personal. You see this every day when you work with your clients. What would you say are, let's say, the main keys for women to heal in their, how they show up in relationships, and the main keys for how men could heal? Well,
in this area, I can direct you to some resources that aren't mine. And I'm happy to do that because, everybody benefits. Yes. There's a great podcast called the Empowered Wife podcast. Okay. And I send my female clients to see this one or to listen to this one a lot. And number one is self-care. Remember which self we're taking care of. Okay. Not the egoic, I'm entitled to everything. You need to go out and work for me so that I can stay pampered and not do anything at home. That's right. The egoic self. Okay. Self-care, right, is number one. And she lays that out, and she's got a great book too, to become a more, and I love that she calls it the Empowered Wife podcast. Because it's going back to traditional values, but it's not disempowering at all. Okay. It's getting into your feminine energy, your authentic feminine energy, so he can take the role of the masculine and finally show up and show you that you're safe and secure. And that's when everything opens up for mind-blowing sex too. I bet. And the other podcast is the sex part of it is Kim Anami's podcast, Orgasmic Enlightenment. It is completely earth-shattering if you've never interacted with that kind of material. She approaches enlightenment through the act of sexual intercourse. And it's amazing. And I send my male clients and my female clients to that podcast. And so for men, so the Empowered Wife podcast for women, and then for men, I have them read No More Mr. Nice Guy by Dr. Robert Glover, because most men in our culture have no idea what it means to be a masculine man, right? And most people suffer from black and white thinking. Okay, so they think if not this, then the extreme is the not that, and there's so much more in between, right? So if I leave this marriage, then I am bound to meet a bad guy. No. Like, why do you think that? If you leave your marriage, I'm bound to go through serial dating and never finding anything I want. Why do you think that? Right? We have this black and white thinking, and it's not true. A lot of men think if I'm not a nice guy, and if I have a backbone and stand up for myself, then I'm an asshole. That's not true. That's not true. Or if I'm an asshole, then I'm not nice, or I'm not kind. And none of that's true. Mm-hmm. So nice guys are actually, they're dishonest, because they're always people pleasing, and they're always trying to put forth portrayal of, look, I want you to think I'm a nice guy. I need you to think I'm a nice guy. I am vying for your approval so that I can think I'm okay. And so they're dishonest. And then
love this.
They have no backbone, right? They've been raised by women, because after World War II, men left the farms and went to the city. So they're out of the home, not raising their boys. Their boys are being raised by women. So they're getting their idea of manhood by women. They're educated by women. Most teachers are women.
Oh
so
my gosh.
That's how it happened, right?
Oh, this is fascinating.
And they're being taught by a lot of embittered women who unfortunately married a drunk guy. And so nice guys have decided, I don't want to be anything like my dad. And in that, throwing the baby out with the bathwater, right? Maybe you don't want to be like some aspects of your dad, but come on, there's got to be something good about him, right? But men, these nice guys, they decide I don't want to be anything like him. And so I'm going to be a castrated man, essentially. Mm-hmm. And so these men, they have no backbone. They don't stand up to their wives. Their wives are in masculine energy, so they're walking all over them. Then they lose respect for them. They're not getting laid. And it's just, a sexless marriage is really not pretty.
Yeah, I can imagine. And I love all that history of like, how did this happen? Where did this come from? And that is really, really fascinating. So
and the irony is not lost on me that I'm a woman, right? Teaching men how to step into their masculinity. But the thing about nice guys is their masculinity is so wounded that they don't have guy friends. They don't go out hunting. They don't go out and do guy things. They tend to make the center of their universe their woman and live for pleasing her. And it doesn't work. And the programming of nice guy is, this isn't working. Try harder.
What? Right.
Try harder at doing all the things that don't work. That's literally the programming of nice guys. And so nice guys, if they're going to work with a coach, it's not going to be a guy. It's going to be somebody that's non-threatening, a woman, right? So I'm happy to be the usherer of men into realizing what's going on. And then I want them to hire a male coach when they're done with me. I want them to join a support group of men to further that journey. But, somebody's got to show it to them.
I love this. And I actually see that being a huge trend and a huge industry on the rise of empowered, healed men, balanced men, really teaching other men how to show up that way. And and have you noticed, is it a long process for that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. That's programming since infancy. Like, it takes time. It takes a time and a bunch of small, courageous acts, doing things that you're afraid to do and bracing for, is she going to be upset?
You notice that the women appreciate the shift.
I love it. There's a story in the book, No More Mr. Nice Guy, where the wives come along to this group session that he's having. And I can't remember what the topic was, but that one of the men was saying, well, I don't want to do this because of such and such. I'm afraid. So I can't remember the example, but the wife goes, no, I want you to disagree with me. I want you to do that. And the guy's jaws dropped, like, what? Yeah, they really do appreciate it.
Oh,
yeah. Women who are with men who just lay over and oh, whatever, honey, it's fine. The women, the way that we think is they're not committed. They're not in it. They're not in it enough to spar with me and call me out on my shit. Cause I unconsciously know I am full of shit. And I don't feel safe if this man is not going to have the backbone to tell me I'm full of shit.
Oh, that's interesting. That it does come back to the safety piece. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So us women want safety, and what do the men want?
Respect. Number one, men want respect.
Amazing. Thank you for being willing to share your story and all of your insights. It's like, I learned so much. I'm going to have to rewatch this a few times to collect all the data, because I can tell that you have spent the time.
Yeah, I really, man, I'm always reading or listening to a podcast. I don't read fiction. I'm just curious. I want to know everything about everything.
As truth seekers, there's no better drug. So for anybody who's listening today, whether it's male or female, what nugget of inspiration and insight specific to connection that you could leave them with that could just elevate their experience of how they show up and give love, or how they receive love?
Courage. You have to have the courage to let somebody in. And it's ego buster to let somebody really in. It's the most courageous thing that you can do. And that vulnerability it's the most soul-bearing, exposed state we can be in, but it's also the most transformative, most empowering. And we have to take those risks, knowing that even if the person hurts us when we're exposed, we'll be okay.
Oh,
we'll be okay. Wow. We can overcome it. We can heal from it. And a really good analogy is, we're the only species, one of the only species that kill each other, that slaughter each other. Okay. Other species, they do fight, and they posture and they fight for territory. But most other species, when you see that they're fighting with one another, there comes a point where when one of them knows he's beat, right? He's beat.
Yeah.
And he turns over and submits to, what's the word? What's the word? Anyways, he's submissive and he shows his soft underbelly.
Okay.
Knowing that the other one isn't going to strike. Trusting that the other, his opponent is not going to cut his belly open and spill his guts. Because it won't. Because there's something built into every species, that revulsion to taking the life of our own kind, which the military industrial complex has figured out how to deprogram in us, which is what screws up a lot of our military. But that taking that risk of showing our underbelly and trusting and having faith that the other person won't strike is the point of transformation. If we never, ever, ever let ourselves surrender and trust that the other person can show up differently than they have, then we're stuck in the past. We are just completely, what's the word? Not resigned, but we're stuck in all of the programmings of the past if we're determined to only see the past patterns. Mm-hmm. On the other hand of that, though, when you do take the risk and they do strike, believe them.
Yes.
Put action behind it.
Yeah. Right. Believe what the other person is communicating to us instead of what we want to translate it into. Right.
Words are not the truth. Actions are, and even more, and here's the paradox, even more truthful than actions is patterns. Right. But the patterns of the past have to change in order for us to have a future that's different than the past. Mm-hmm. So there's that teetering, that suspension of belief, the suspension of disbelief, both of them. where we're giving the person a chance to diverge from their past patterns, but we're also believing them if they choose not to.
Yes. Yes, 1,000%.
And anyone can be on their best behavior for 3 months. Anyone, right? So transformation doesn't happen when somebody is trying to change to keep somebody. It never works. It will never work if you try to change to keep somebody.
Agreed.
Okay. Transformation happens when we let go, not when we hang on. Right. So if you're in a place of limbo, I'm not sure that they're the person that they've always been. I'm also not sure that they're totally changed. This is an evaluation period, and it has to go longer than 3 months.
Okay.
Right. Before you resign yourself and let not your guard. I don't want to say guard.
Right.
Where you decide that, oh, they're changed. They're a different person. I can now stop paying so much attention. I can stop being so aware. I can go back to letting my unconscious mind and my habitual patterns, and I can stop doing the work of being aware. You have to continually being present with the present moment to see if a new pattern actually has been created and established. And that takes longer than 3 months.
I'm sure. I mean, for any of us, right?
Yeah.
Like just trying to change anything about ourselves is shockingly challenging sometimes. And I've also witnessed myself have radical transformation when I have a shift in consciousness.
Yes.
So,
And that's it right there. Shift in consciousness comes first before the behavior. And
always.
you can tell when somebody's just trying to behave on their best behavior.
Right.
You can tell the energy
Yeah.
in their body language and the tenseness of their body. Like you can just tell if somebody's just on their best behavior so they don't F it up and lose you. Mm-hmm. And if they're actually trying to change because they know it's good for them.
Agreed.
Right? They know that whether you stick with them or not, they're still going to benefit from doing their work. Right. And you can definitely tell the difference. And don't delude yourself into thinking that there isn't a difference, because there is. And most people, this is the one thing that I hear the most of, and it's so delusional. Well, if I mattered enough, if he loved me enough, he would change. That is the most egoic thing and the most anti-connection, the most anti-relationship thing you could say, because it doesn't work if you're trying to change to keep somebody. It just doesn't.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Wow. This is such a powerful topic because, as you mentioned before, it's almost like if we can get this piece figured out, our emotional intelligence and our ability to connect and relate, then it almost seems like everything else in some way would be really solved, from, the mental health, the physical health, the chaos of us just being in a reactive state, and even feeling safe in our own body and on this planet. So I think this is such an incredible time for people like you that are doing this work. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you for all of your just words of affirmation. It's great.
And where can people find you, follow you, watch your show, and work with you?
Well, they can go to my website. It's meriannedrew.com, and my name's spelled a little differently, so I'll spell it out. meriannedrew.com. And if someone's just interested in a conversation to explore what clarity they can gain from just one conversation, which could be a hell of a lot, you can just book a free discovery session with me. And on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, Merianne Drew Coaching, both of them. And my podcast is the My Story Podcast. You can find it on Podbean. I think it's the one, but they just got bought by somebody though. The Spotify, I think Spotify.
Oh, okay, perfect. Well, if you want to send me your links to everything, I'll make sure to put everything in the show notes so that they can connect with you really easily. But just want to say thank you again so much. This was so fun. Merianne and I just met recently, like last month or maybe a couple months ago, at a entrepreneurial networking event. And it was just such a reminder when I was getting ready for the show today of how fun that when I started this show, I had no idea who I was going to be interviewing. I just trusted that the right people would.
I love that.
I know.
I love that.
Yeah. Always show up. So it was really, really fun to have that evidence today.
Thank you.
So really,
thank you for the opportunity. I love the learning that I do just from conversations. I get just as much out of every session that I have with people as they get out of it too. So
same.
Thank you.
Agree. Well, we'll go ahead and wrap this up. So to any of you that are watching, please like and subscribe. And if you have a transformational story about any of the experiment topics that we cover on the show, please reach out to me. My email is in the description box below, and I would love to have you on to share your story as well. And at the very least, hopefully what you got from this episode is that connection truly is the key, and that courageousness is the doorway to getting there, and just to serve as a reminder that you are the master that you've been waiting for. I'll see you guys in the next episode.